Right guys, in this video we're going to put our port forwarding skills to the test, and specifically reverse port forwarding. So this is a part 2. If you haven't seen the first one, go and check that out because it's a precursor to this one. I'll put the link to the video in the description. So in this one, I think we'll start off with a drawing to see what we're actually going to do, because it's going to be a little bit mind-bendy, a little bit confusing of what it is without a drawing. So that definitely make it simpler to see what we're up to. But basically, we're going to use the skills we learned in the last video, but this time we're going to do a reverse port forward. Now this is a critical skill. So for example, say we're on an engagement. We've got our attack machine that's been placed in the environment. We've got access to a secondary machine in the environment via SSH. And that machine, and only via that machine, can we access the third internal machine. A further example, we might be able to reverse an RDP connection back to ourselves, but what if we need to run low-level commands through Meterpreter or something like that? Then knowing how to get a shell onto that system and call back to us through reverse port forwarding is a critical skill. Like I say, it's a bit mind-bendy. It is a bit, especially before you've done it a few times, it is a bit strange, but we'll break it down step by step, get into it. Okay, so we have got our Kali machine on a 10.10.0.11 IP, and we've got our pivot machine over here on 2, it's dual homed, so that means it's got 2 network interfaces. That's why it's got 2 IP addresses. It's got this one, or this network that it shares, with a host address of 5, and it's also able to talk on this network via its host IP. And it's got the host IP 50, and then we've got the Windows server, which is on the 10.10.10 network. So these two can communicate, and these two could communicate. We've got a 10.10.0 network, and over here we've got the 10.10.10 network. So much like the last video, this is like a similar explanation. So let me remove those extra lines because it might be making it a little bit busy, a bit noisy. So here's a scenario. We're on the engagement. We've managed to get an RDP connection on this server, and we can view it via the Kali machine, but the RDP alone isn't good enough, so we need to be able to transfer files, and it'd be nice to use some of Meterpreter's tooling. We need to create a shell on the Kali machine, and we'll use the pivot's IP as the local host. Specify a port, 8080 for example. So when we get the shell on the server and we call it, it will communicate back to this address and not to our Kali, because remember, it can't directly access our Kali machine, so it wouldn't know how to get back to us. So we've got to specify that when the reverse shell is activated, it looks for this IP and this port, so on the pivot machine, and then with some reverse port forwarding wizardry, we will then get that to communicate back to our Kali machine on a listener we set up. So we'll have to probably put out a different IP of 8000, for example. So again, just to quickly summarize, stage 1, send the shell to the pivot. Then we will get the pivot to transfer the shell over to the Windows machine. We will then activate the shell. This will call back to the IP we specify and the port on the pivot machine. And then with reverse port forwarding, this will communicate back to our Kali machine. I know it looks techie. I know it looks confusing. You're probably thinking, what the hell? And it is. But once you do it a few times and we actually break it down and look into it, it's not that bad, and it kind of makes sense in the end. So that's what we're going to be doing. So if we actually jump into it now. Okay, so now we've looked at the drawing, let's actually jump into this. So we know we've got our Kali machine, which has got access to the pivot. Make a new directory to keep ourselves nice and neat. So to start with, we need to make a reverse shell, so we can use MSF Venom for this. We will use do Windows x64 Meterpreter reverse. Let's just do a reverse TCP. That's fine. So this is where things start getting a little bit confusing. So the local host isn't the local host on this Kali machine, because we're going to be running this script from the third internal machine. So this needs to call back to the pivot machine. So the local host, like I say, isn't our Kali one, but it's the internal IP of the pivot host. File type exe, executable, call it shell. Local port, so this will be the port listening on the pivot machine again. So that's the one it's going to call back to. So that's at 8080. Let that do its thing. Help if I put an equals in it. Nice, so that's generated our file. So now this is the file that's going to get executed on the Windows machine. So we need to get it over there. So if you haven't seen if you don't know how to do file transfers, I've got a video for that as well. I'll put a link to that in the description. So this one, if we start a Python server, oh no, actually hang on, because we need the Windows machine is going to need to download it from the pivot machine. So first of all, we need to get it on the pivot machine. So it's a few steps, but it's all right. It's stuff we've learned before. So SCP, we don't need to do arg. It's not a file. It's just it's not a folder. It's just a single file. Shell.exe, and we're going to send that to the pivot machine 10.10.05, and we'll just place that in the pivots directory. Excellent, so that's on the pivot machine. So now if we SSH into the pivot machine, so there's our shell.exe. So now we're in the middle machine, the one with the two interfaces. So we've got this interface that allows a Kali machine to talk to it on the same network, and then we've got the third interface which allows it to talk to the internal Windows machine on the other network. So now what we need to do is set up a Python HTTP server. We can use whatever port we want for this. I'm just going to put it on 8000 just because it's only temporary until we download it. So the example we're using on the Windows machine, we've got an RDP connection, but we're not happy with it because we can't run the commands and stuff, and it's pretty locked down, so we can't transfer files across in our example. So if we just jump on that machine quickly now, and then open up PowerShell, probably should add a secondary user on this and just keep running it under administrator, but check the IP. So we were on the 10.10.10 network. If you remember, that's this network here, so we can connect to each other. If we do IWR, HTTP, the IP of the pivot machine, which is 10.10.50, 8000 for the port we specified, and shell.exe out file for what we want to call it. We'll just keep it at shell.exe. And there it is. So that's ready to go. So we can execute that when we're ready, but we're still not ready yet. So now that's transferred, we can get rid of this Python HTTP server. We can actually exit out of that altogether because we don't need that anymore. Well, not for now anyway. So I'm going to create another tab. So we'll use this tab for MSF console. And what we're going to do in here, we'll set up a HTTP, we'll set up the multi-handler so we can catch the shell when it calls back. So use exploit, multi-handler, look at the options. So the local host on this occasion, so this actually is on the Kali machine, so set localhost to 0.0.0. That means listen on all interfaces on this Kali machine. Set the local port to something different. What did we set the Venom payload as at? We set that as 8080, so that's what's listening on the pivot machine. So we'll just go for something we'll use something different on this one. We'll just go 8000. We need to set the payload type, which was Windows. If you press tab, for some reason in MSF console, when you press tab, it takes a minute to work out what you're doing, and then it allows you to auto-complete. It was x64 for the architecture, interpreter / reverse TCP, and that's it. We should be good now. So if we run that, that'll be listening for the connection back from the pivot machine. So now this is where it gets a bit The syntax looks weird, to be honest. I'm not going to lie, it does look strange. It does take a bit of time to get your head around it. So it's SSH, capital R, and it's the internal IP of our pivot host. So we got the pivot host that we connect to currently. We need its secondary IP, which is the one it uses to connect to the Microsoft machine. SSH-R, the internal IP of that pivot machine, which is 10.10.10.50, colon, 8080, because that's the port it's listening on from the shell we created, colon, 0.0.0.0, that's our listening interface on port 8000, and then we connect to the pivot machine to establish the connection. Capital N, V for verbose, press enter, asks us to log into the pivot machine, so that's listening, this is listening. So now, if we go to the Windows machine and run that shell, and if all's worked well, we get a shell back. So there we go. Step into a shell, and now we've got a shell back on that Windows machine, on our Kali machine, so we can use tools that are built into Interpreter and all sorts of stuff. So that, although it might seem convoluted and it might seem unnecessary, but trust me, that is a skill that you are going to need to get your head around if you're serious about pen testing. So again, to clarify what we've done, so the Windows machine's called an executable, and we've funneled the reverse connection back through the pivot machine and then to our Kali machine. I hope that's made it easier to understand, because it is confusing. There's no two ways about it. And the more you do these things, the easier it gets. So yeah, thanks again for watching. I'll catch you in the next one.